You protected one of our own.
Who are you?
We are her family, and we've come for her.
Marcus Chen didn't save the girl because he thought it would change his life. He saved her because it was the right thing to do, and because he was, frankly, too stubborn and too human to walk away from something that ugly. He had no idea that 3 days later, he'd open the door to his workshop and find 7-foot-tall warrior women standing in the corridor, blades at their hips, staring at him like they'd been looking for him for a very long time. Stay with me, because this story goes places you won't expect. By the end of this, you're going to understand why humans are terrifying to the rest of the galaxy. And it has nothing to do with weapons. You're going to learn what a veiled debt bond actually means, and why the slavers who took that girl made the single worst business decision in the history of the Outer Reach. And you're going to see how one mechanic from Cincinnati accidentally became the most protected man on the station. Let's go back to the beginning. Docking Station Karev 9 sat at the edge of known space, like a rusted thumbtack jammed into the dark. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't prestigious. What it was convenient, a waypoint between the consortium's trade lanes and the lawless stretch of the Outer Reach, where 3 different factions claimed jurisdiction and none of them actually enforced anything. Marcus Chen had been living on Karev 9 for 4 years. He ran a repair bay on level 6, plasma conduits, thruster calibration, translation matrices that had gone sideways, coolant systems that smelled like burning ambition. If it was broken and it flew, Marcus could fix it. He wasn't rich. He wasn't influential. He was, by his own description, adequately employed and adequately caffeinated, which, on Karev 9, practically made him upper class. He had a reputation for being fair. He charged what the job was worth. Not a credit more, not a credit less. He paid his suppliers on time. He didn't lie, even when lying would have been easier, which in the Outer Reach was such an unusual character trait that several of his regular clients had assumed it was some kind of manipulation. It wasn't. Marcus was just Marcus. The day everything changed, he wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a replacement coupling seal for a Duraki freighter that had come in with a cracked manifold. The parts dealer he needed was on level 2, which meant walking through the market district, a loud, fragrant, morally flexible stretch of stalls and back corridor shops that sold everything from food synthesizers to forged transit documents. He was almost through it when he heard the sound. Not a scream. It was too controlled for a scream. More like the sound of someone desperately trying not to make a sound. A kind of bitten-down keening that cut right through the ambient noise of the market. Marcus slowed. Most people kept walking. On Karev 9, you learned fast that slowing down in the market district was an invitation to become someone else's problem. But there it was again, that sound, from the narrow service corridor between a food stall and what passed for a currency exchange. He stopped. He told himself later that he paused for maybe 2 full seconds, weighing it up. In reality, it was probably less than 1. He turned and walked into the corridor. Now, here's what Marcus saw, and here's why it mattered. Because what he stumbled into wasn't just a mugging, it wasn't a dispute, it was a transaction. And the thing being transacted, the thing making that sound, was a person. She was Vel. Marcus knew the species by sight. Most station regulars did. The Vel were tall and lean, built like the predators their ancestors had been, with skin that shifted between shades of deep amber and bronze, depending on the light and their emotional state. 4-fingered hands with knuckles that bent both ways. Eyes the color of old copper, wide-set and vertical-pupiled. This one was young, not a child, but young. maybe the equivalent of a human teenager, though it was hard to be sure. She was crouched against the wall of the service corridor, wrists bound with a neural suppressor cuff, the kind that created a low-grade pain loop to keep the wearer compliant. And she was doing her absolute best not to react to it. Standing over her were two men. Marcus had seen their type before. They wore the kind of blank, processed expression that people get when they've convinced themselves that what they're doing is just commerce, just logistics, just a job. One of them was making entries on a transaction pad. The other was talking into a comm unit in low, clipped phrases. There was a third figure at the far end of the corridor, broader, watching the entrance. Security, probably. The man with the transaction pad looked up at Marcus. "Move along," he said. His universal standard was flat and bureaucratic. "Private arrangement." Marcus looked at the girl. She was looking back at him. Not pleading. The veil don't plead. He'd learn that later. But her copper eyes were absolutely locked on his face, with an intensity that he described for years afterward as the most unsettling and clarifying thing he'd ever experienced. Like she was making a record. Like she was memorizing exactly who had seen this and kept walking, or who had seen it and hadn't. Marcus Chen, who had grown up in Cincinnati, who had watched his mother work double shifts, who had once gotten a black eye in 7th grade for telling a bigger kid to leave someone alone, who had been shaped by approximately 31 years of that particular kind of human stubbornness, did not move along. "How much?" he said. The man with the transaction pad blinked. "Excuse me?" "The neural suppressor cuff," Marcus said. "That's a Series 7 compliance unit. I've refitted 2 of them. How much are you into her for? What's the debt she's working off?" There was a pause. The two men exchanged a look. This was an unexpected angle, not outrage, not a threat. Just a flat commercial question from someone who apparently knew the hardware. "Not a debt situation," the man with the comm said carefully. "Acquisition." "Right," Marcus said. "So, name a price." Another pause. Longer this time. The man with the transaction pad named a number. It was extortionate. It was designed to end the conversation. Marcus looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Did the math on what he had in his service account, what he had set aside for the freighter parts, and what he would need to get through the next 3 weeks. Then he transferred the credits. The man with the transaction pad actually looked surprised. He stared at his pad, looked up, looked at Marcus like he was a new kind of problem he hadn't budgeted for. Then he shrugged, bent down, and removed the suppressor cuff. The girl stood up. She was taller than Marcus. Most Veil were. She straightened to her full height, rubbed her wrists once, and turned to look at him. "Do you need somewhere to stay tonight?" Marcus asked. "I have a couch. It's not impressive, but it's not a service corridor." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, in accented but clear universal standard, "I do not understand what you want from me." "Nothing," Marcus said. "I want nothing from you. Come on, I'll make coffee." "Do Veil drink coffee? We'll figure it out." He brought her back to the workshop. He made coffee. As it turned out, Veil do not drink coffee. But she watched him drink it with an expression of intense anthropological fascination that he found unreasonably charming. Her name was Lyra. She was 19 years old by Veil reckoning, and she was not, Marcus would learn very quickly, your average teenager. The Veil, Marcus learned over the next 2 days, were not simply a species. They were a sisterhood. Not metaphorically, not as a cultural title, literally. The Veil were a matriarchal warrior society structured around bloodline chains called hearth lines, and each hearth line operated something like a cross between a family, a military unit, and a diplomatic body. Every veil carried what translated roughly as a bond rank, a social legal designation that determined their obligations and their protections under veil law. Lyra was not low rank. She was, in fact, the third daughter of the matriarch of the Seval hearth line, one of the 7 founding lines of the Veil Sisterhood, which meant that her abduction wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was either a declaration of war or someone's catastrophic miscalculation. Marcus absorbed this information over 2 evenings, sitting in his workshop while Lyra told it to him with the methodical clarity of someone who had spent most of the last 48 hours recalibrating themselves after a traumatic experience and was coping by explaining things in complete sentences. He did not interrupt. He made more coffee. He nodded. When she finished, he said, "Okay, so your people are going to come looking for you." "They are already looking," Lyra said. "They will find the trail within 3 days, I estimate, possibly 2. "And when they get here?" "That depends," she said, "on what I tell them." There was something in her tone, a careful quality, like she was watching to see if he understood what she was saying. He did, a little. He thought about how he'd found her, how he'd paid over most of his liquid savings, how he'd asked nothing in return and hadn't once, in 2 days, so much as hinted at an expectation. "Tell them whatever's true," Marcus said. "I don't need credit for it." Lyra looked at him for a long time with those copper eyes. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly the wrong thing to say to a veil." He had no idea what she meant. He wouldn't understand for another 18 hours. He slept on his cot that night and woke up the next morning to a sound he'd never heard before. It was coming from outside his workshop door. Not a knock, more like a resonance, a low, structured vibration that seemed to run through the walls themselves, like the station was being asked a question. He opened the door. There were 7 of them. 7 Veil women, standing in the corridor of Level 6, docking station Karev 9 at 0630 station time. They were tall. The shortest was easily 6'4". They wore traveling armor, segmented and dark, with the amber gold symbol of the Seval hearth line across the chest piece. Every one of them had a blade at her hip and a second blade across her back. The one at the front was older, perhaps 60 by human standards, with silver threading through her bronze skin and eyes that had seen enough of the universe to stop being impressed by most of it. But she was looking at Marcus Chen with something that was definitely not disinterest. "You are the human," she said. It wasn't a question. "Marcus Chen," he said. "Yeah, do you want to come in? It's a little cramped, but you paid the acquisition price," she said. "For my daughter, out of your own account, without negotiation, without condition." She needed help, Marcus said. There weren't a lot of complicated calculations involved. The woman, the matriarch, he'd realize in a moment, was quiet for a few seconds. Something moved across her face. Not softness exactly, more like recognition. "I am Matriarch Savalro of the Seval line," she said. "And you, Marcus Chen, have placed an uncontested claim on the gratitude of my hearth. I really didn't do this for..." "Under Veil law," Savalro continued, with the practiced patience of someone who had spoken law in formal settings for decades. "An unconditioned act of material protection extended to a bonded member of a hearth line creates a debt of breath. This debt cannot be declined. It cannot be minimized. It does not expire." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again. "You owe nothing from me," he said carefully. "That is correct," Savile Rose said. "We owe everything to you. These are very different statements." Inside the workshop, Lyra appeared in the doorway behind Marcus. The matriarch's eyes went to her daughter, and for just a moment the formal precision cracked. Something raw and relieved moved across her face before the mask came back. Then she looked at Marcus again. "We will speak of the terms of the debt of breath," she said. "You will listen. You will not argue the value. That is not your role in this." Marcus looked back at Lyra. Lyra gave him a look that said, very clearly, "I tried to warn you." He stepped back from the door. "Okay," he said. "Anyone want coffee?" Here's where I want you to stop and think about what just happened. Because this is the part of the story that says something real about what humans are and why the rest of the galaxy has never quite been able to figure us out. Marcus didn't calculate the cost-benefit on saving Lyra. He didn't do it because he expected to be owed something or because he thought her family was important. He did it because he couldn't not do it. Because he was wired by every experience and relationship and stubbornness and mid-grade empathy that had built him across 31 years to turn into that corridor. And that incapacity for strategic detachment in the face of something obviously wrong is one of the things that makes humans genuinely strange in a galaxy full of species who learned long ago to calculate before they acted. The Veil had a word for it. It translated, roughly, as the beautiful flaw. And under Veil law, the beautiful flaw carried the full weight of an unbreakable contract. The matriarch explained the terms. It took a while. A debt of breath, under Seval Hearthline law, entitled the holder to 3 things. The first was physical protection. Any member of the Seval line within range of a threat to the holder was obligated to intervene. This was not symbolic. 7 women had traveled across the outer reach to stand in the corridor of level 6, not just to retrieve Lyra, but because Marcus was technically at risk by having housed her, and the debt could not be claimed until he was confirmed safe. They had guarded his door for 2 hours before knocking, because they'd identified a low-level surveillance drone in the corridor that belonged to the slavers. Marcus had had no idea. The drone, the matriarch informed him, had been collected. The individuals operating it had been, and here she used a veiled phrase that translated loosely as persuaded to pursue other commercial interests. He decided not to ask for specifics. The second term was commercial endorsement. The Seval Hearthline had trade relationships across 11 systems. A holder of a debt of breath received the right to display the Seval bond seal on their business. A mark that, to anyone who knew Veil law, said, "This person is ours. Touch them wrong and answer to us." On Karev 9, in the Outer Reach, that mark was worth more than a security contract from any 3 of the major factions. The third term, and this was the one that actually made Marcus sit down, was permanent counsel access. If Marcus ever needed advice, legal representation under Veil law, navigation through consortium politics, or intelligence on threats in the Outer Reach, he could call on the Seval line directly. Not a request, not a favor, a right. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. Then he said, "I just want to be clear. I didn't save her because I wanted any of this." "I know," Savile Rose said. "That is why you get all of it." Lyra, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a mug of something warm that wasn't coffee, but was apparently acceptable to Veil biology, watched her mother and this human look at each other, and felt something in her chest settle into place for the first time since the corridor. "There is one more thing," the matriarch said. She reached into a case one of the other women held and produced a small item. a flat disc of dark metal engraved with a Seval sigil. "This is your bond seal. Carry it. Every Vale who sees it will know what you are to our hearth." Marcus took it. It was heavier than it looked. Warm somehow, like it had been held for a long time. "What am I to your hearth?" he asked. The matriarch looked at him for a moment. "Protected," she said, and claimed, "You are ours to guard, Marcus Chen, for the rest of your life, whether you want it or not." She paused. "I would suggest wanting it." He looked at the seal in his hand, at the 7 warrior women in his workshop, at Lyra, who gave him a small, composed smile that somehow, in the context of everything, felt like an apology and a welcome in equal measure. He put the seal in his shirt pocket. "Okay," he said. "Who's hungry? I can order from the food stalls. There's a place on level 3 that does good protein wraps. I don't know if Vale eat protein wraps, but I'm willing to find out." The matriarch stared at him. Then, slowly, she laughed. It was a low, rolling sound. Nothing like a human laugh. More like a purr that had gotten enthusiastic. 3 of the other women joined in. "The beautiful flaw," Lyra murmured, half to herself. Karevnine changed after that. Not obviously, not overnight. But the Seval bond seal appeared above the door of Marcus's repair bay on level 6. And word moved through the station the way word always does in places where information is currency. 2 weeks later, the crew that had been running the acquisition operation in the market district quietly relocated to a different station. A month after that, 3 new Vale clients appeared at Marcus's bay with repair contracts. Apparently, news of a bond seal on a human business was unusual enough to generate curiosity across the outer reach. Lyra stayed for a month before she went home. She came back 6 months later with a Vale, translation matrix that needed refitting, and the transparent excuse that she wanted to verify he hadn't gotten himself killed. He hadn't. He did have a new scar on his left forearm from a run-in with a faulty plasma seal. But that was just the job. And on the wall above his workbench, where another man might have hung a schedule or a parts catalog, Marcus Chen had pinned a single note, handwritten on a piece of actual paper. "Turn into the corridor." Marcus didn't save the girl because he calculated the angle. He saved her because he was human. Because that wiring, that specific incapacity to keep walking when something is wrong, runs so deep in us that we sometimes forget it's a choice at all. The rest of the galaxy calls it the beautiful flaw. I call it the reason we'll be fine out there. Whatever's waiting for us in the dark, we've got this. If you want more stories like this, humans doing the unexpected thing, the stubborn thing, the thing that turns out to matter, hit subscribe and check out the video on screen now. I've got a story about a human navigator who got stranded on a hostile world and convinced 3 warring species to form an alliance just by being annoyingly good at cooking. You're going to want to hear that one. See you there.